Hey everybody, this is me, Undead Viking. I want to do an RPG review for you today, and I haven't done one of these in a while, and I'm going to hopefully do more here in 2016. But this is the book I'm going to show you today. It is called Shadow of the Demon Lord. This is an RPG system that is written by Robert J. Schwab, and it is relatively new. It had a very successful Kickstarter, and it just got released basically in December. This one totally flew under my radar. I hadn't heard anything about it at all. I don't even know how I got tuned in on it. Somehow I think I saw a post on Facebook or something, who knows. And I reached out to Robert and I was like, gosh, is there some way I can still get in on the Kickstarter? And unfortunately I couldn't, but once it got published he sent me a line, and so I was able to buy the book and get some other stuff for it as well. But the reason why, well, first of all, the cover obviously is really cool looking, this big giant demon lord or whatever, and these I mean, I can only assume that these guys are gonna die here, but you know, whatever. So you have this giant demon with this big giant mallet that he's gonna be smashing people with. But the whole premise of this this RPG is that the world is coming to an end. And that's very grim and very awful, but that's the premise. The premise is that this nameless, faceless demon lord, or at least if you know the name, you don't say it out loud, is the dark cults that worshipped it or him or her or whatever have succeeded. And they are bringing about the end of the world. It's like the way they describe it is that the bars to the cage that is trapped the demon lord are shaking, and they're on the precipice of breaking. And so you have these heroes, and not really heroes, mind you, like living in this world where the end is nigh. And when I heard about that theme, it gripped me, and I was like, ooh, you know, that sounds really interesting. And the more I read about it, the more I looked into it, the more I got excited about it. I'm going to talk a little bit about the mechanisms or whatever a little bit here, or I shouldn't even say mechanisms, but the way the game is played. But I should mention that this is, strangely, an amalgamation of of a lot of things. It has some old school D&D mixed in with some 4th edition D&D. I know I'm like, oh, you know, I can see the cringe, you know, from a lot of people. But it has some like 4th edition like mixtured in there, and actually I'll talk about that in just a few seconds here. But also it lends heavily on the Warhammer fantasy role-playing game. Now, backing up, Warhammer Fantasy Role-Playing, I'm not talking about the one that Fantasy Flight put out like 5 years ago or whatever, that misbegotten child of whatever mind they had. I honestly, I never played it. I read the rules, I wasn't taken by it. But I played the original Warhammer role-playing game. And the whole idea of the Warhammer role-playing game was your characters aren't going to live. It was a situation where the dice are stacked against you. You kind of you had you were just kind of like this normal person. Maybe if you were lucky, you started off as being like maybe a mercenary or you know, like a dwarven guardsman or something. But more likely than not, you were like a potter or a blacksmith or you know, or even worse, like a camp follower. And you just had like heroism thrust upon you. Not that you were very heroic, but you had a situation where like you either had to sink or swim, and so if your character swam, they would maybe somehow slightly become somewhat good at what they were doing, but along the way, most likely they'd gone insane, and they like were just this decrepit shell of whatever they were before. And it was a very fun game to play. It was a very fun game to GM, but it didn't lend itself to a long campaign, mostly because your characters, as I said, they just didn't live long. You know, I mean, you just didn't last a long time, and this was when I played this, this was during a situation where I kind of like 3.0 had been out for a while, and I gotten bored of it, and so I kind of I remember playing Middle Earth role playing, and I wanted to, and like I think they had just come out with like a second or third edition Warhammer Fantasy role playing. I decided to pick up the books, and I have them somewhere. I have no idea. I have giant stacks of role playing books in my bookcase, as any role playing gamer probably has, but. You know, but the game just, like I said, didn't lend itself to a campaign. It didn't lend itself to a larger idea. And so I love the idea of it. I love the idea of this, as they called, a grim and perilous world, but I didn't like the fact that it was so grim and perilous, if you will. So, now, you might be saying, why are you giving me a review of a Warhammer Fantasy role-playing? But here, I'll talk a little bit more. So, Shadow of the Demon Lord, what this is it kind of takes that grim and perilous world, because, obviously, the world is about to end. I mean, theoretically, you could, you know, there is the idea that you could maybe bring the Earth back from the precipice, and you could stop this horrible calamity from happening. But chances are you won't. But the thing is, you have to try, right? And so you have this glorious moment where you could very well be the hero that your world needs. The chances are 1 in 1,000 that you'd be able to pull them off, but you could. And so this is where, like, this big story is. Now, you don't have to play the game based in that world. You could take this system and you could apply it to anything. But I like this system for that process. Now, just going over a few things that are important. The game bases itself a little bit on the old the D20 system. You don't need a bunch of crazy dice. All you need is like basically a handful of 6-sided and a 20-sided. That's all you need to play the game. And you have like a very non-standard human like races available to you. You have humans, dwarves, which okay, but there are no elves. The elves are like this kind of like they're a fairy kind, you know, and they're kind of aloof, and they just don't really mix with the regular world anymore. But there are changelings, which are kind of cool. Like, and you think, okay, it's a changeling. You can turn into it, and they can see somebody, and they can, like a doppelganger. They can take their image. You think, oh, that's pretty powerful. Yeah, well, it doesn't really matter because you're probably not going to live long. But there are clockworks, which are just what you think. They are like golems or whatever. And I, you know, and I was like, you know, I don't really like the idea of that, but. When we played it, and we had a character playing a golem, you know, or a clockwork, they actually afforded a great deal of role playing, and that's something. Put a pin in that. We'll come back to that in just a little bit. You have orcs, and orcs were like created as this slave race that you know are supposed to be doing all this grunt work, but they've kind of broken free of that slavery, and now there's, you know, there's still some that are very savage and you know are evil technically. There aren't really no real alignments in this game because, you know, whatever, you get corrupted by demons and what have you. But and then there are goblins, which you can play. And goblins are actually not like the goblins like you find in Pathfinder. Goblins are actually like a fairy kin, if you will. But they were thrown out of the fairy world by the rest of them for whatever reason. You know, they didn't like them, or you know, the process of as far as the fairies go, the goblins didn't fit anymore, if you will. So they were thrown out, and you know, and so each one of these races has within it this like overarching like need, if you will. Each of them has you know, like waiting for the other boot to drop kind of situation with it. Like, you know, orcs, you know, obviously they're brutish and they're strong and they're powerful, but everybody kind of assumes that they're just ready to snap. Goblins are dirty and decrepit, and, you know, obviously they get thrown out. You know, because of something. You know, what could that something be? Dwarves hate everybody. I mean, they're just this. They're like doomed by the gods, or they consider themselves doomed by the gods. You know, and they just have this. They have a hatred, especially towards one specific thing. They get to pick like a hatred that they have as far as another race goes. You know, and humans are obviously the grab bag. Clockworks are just, you know, this alien type of, like, you know, they're created by magic, and what are they doing? And changelings, everybody just assumes that they're just, you know, like, you know, gonna try to kill you or what have you. I mean, so there's. The world makes it so it's kind of cynical already, you know, and it's and the cool thing about it is that with all those different races, you know, it's when you step away from dwarf, gnome, elf, halfling, you know, you step away and you input this new kind of basic set, if you will. It gets people out of their comfort zone. You know, it gets people out of, you know, like, that standardized feeling of for RPGs that they've had for a great deal of time, and I really do like that. Now, coupled with that is the fact that this is a very fantastic world. I mean, it is pure fantasy. If you want to have a human that has green skin and purple hair, you can just do that, and there's a reason for it. You were born under the shadow of the Demon Lord. That is a very common thread. You know, it's like there are things like that that you can be just a complete nutball character, if you will, and it isn't really all that nutball for the world. You know, if you want your goblin to be like carrying around a little dolly and talking to it all the time, that's perfectly fine. Have at it. Be quirky. Be weird. And the whole premise of the book is that everything's just a little off kilter. When you create your character, you come up with a background for them, or you have tables that you can roll your kind of nutball background over. Like, here's a changeling background. Here's a thing. Here's one that says you murdered the person whose identity you stole, so you could take over that person's life. You start the game with 1 corruption. Now, corruption is a system situation where as you gain corruption, basically your soul turns dark and evil, and as you do more and more horrible things, your soul is consigned to burn in everlasting hell. So there is actually like something bad that happens when you're evil, meaning that when you die, there's no way you can come back, you know. And so there's things like, and like corruption also, like you start exhibiting signs of corruption, like open sores on that won't heal on your hands and things like that. So it's like people can notice that about you, you know, as far as just how, you know, just, you know, theoretically awful you are or whatever. So here's like the background for clockwork. No, like when you make a clockwork, you actually do roll to see what your purpose was, and you can pick this too. But I mean, rolling is always fun, right? So like, you can. You were built for war. Increase your strength or agility by 2. You were built to use magic. Increase your intellect or will by 2. You know, it's like, what is your form? You are a small winged clockwork. Reduce your health by 5 and size by half. You can fly, but you must land at the end of your movement or fall. You are 3 feet high and you weigh 50 pounds. Or you are a large clock with the lower body of a horse. Increase your size to 2 and your speed by 2. However, reduce your defense by 3. You're 6 feet long, you're 6 feet tall, and you weigh 750 pounds. So, hey, it's things like that, and you can come up with a reason why. I pulled a sled for a wizard when he went and collected logs from the forest. You know, you can have that. Like background, background for your clockwork. You were made to be a translator. You can speak an additional language. One of your hands ends in a sword instead of a hand. Things like that. So you have different things like that, and that's just a smattering of things. And each race has those crazy things going on. Now, the thing about it also about the game is that you aren't going to roll up your stats. Basically, each race has its starting attributes, and it just says these are what they are. And it goes by the idea of 10 is the base. And so if you have an attribute, like say your combat, and your strength is 12, you're going to swing a sword, you get to add +2. If it was 15, you'd add +5. If you had an 8, you'd -2. And so, you know, and usually, like the defense of the thing that you're fighting, depending on their armor or whatever, is the number that you're going for. Pretty much straight out of D20. But for most things, for most actions, your roll that you need to get is a 10. It's just straight across the board. It's a 10. How wonderful is that? There's no like, what's the difficulty class of this lock on the gate? Oh, it's difficulty class 35. You know, or there's nothing. It's a 10. And the reason why that works is because having extraordinary stats and abilities just really doesn't exist in this game. I mean, people, if you, I like Pathfinder. I enjoyed my days of 3.5. You know, but those things have a power creep to them, and once you kind of get to 8th or 7th level, the game starts to break. You know, basically you can create a fighter that does like plus 60 points of damage, you know, and things like that. I mean, it's just you can really start to break systems, and this game just, it doesn't have that in it. You know, basically because even if like you did become kind of powerful, combat is very, very dangerous. I mean, you start with a health of 10 normally, depending on your race, and you slowly maybe get that up to 20, 25 or things like that. But then you're dealing with combat, the things that do 2d6 damage and you know, that if they hit you more than 2 or 3 times, chances are you might be dead. And so combat is a very, very deadly, very, very chancy thing to go and enter yourself into. And that's one of the things I really like about the game as well. So, all that being said, so think of that as like the base 10. That's the kind of the idea behind this. And then, you can have modifiers. I mean, as far as, like I said, with your tributes. But the other big thing you can have is you have what are called banes and boons. And these are all dependent upon certain attributing factors. They could be because of your ability. You'll have like a boon when trying to open locks, or you'll have a boon when you're using a certain type of weapon, or perhaps if you have, like, if you're fatigued, you have a bane when you're trying to do something. Now, with the bane or the boon, what it is that each boon you get to take a 6-sided and roll it with your d20. The same thing goes for banes. You also take 6-sided for banes. Now, if you have multiple banes and boons for a certain thing, say you had 3 boons and 1 bane, you just get 2 boons, and you roll those dice. There's never a situation where you're going to roll some good and some bad. Now, here's the thing. You're not adding those dice, technically. What you're going to do is you're going to add the highest dice. So, you roll a d20, and if you had 2 boons, you roll 2d6, and if you had a 5 and a 3, you wouldn't add 8, but you'd add the 5. If it was Bane, same thing. If you roll a 5 and a 3, you take the 5 and minus that. And that's how you get certain scores higher. The neat thing is that if like something's defense can never be higher than 25. So like if you're actually trying to like do something, like attack something, it can never be higher than 25. You can't get to a point where it's like, oh, I have an armor class of 42. You know, that just doesn't happen in this system. So, and that's, the other thing, because combat is a thing that's going to happen, I'm just going to talk about combat really quickly. Combat is theater of the mind. You do not have a grid. If you wanted to, you could use miniatures. Everything is considered in yards, like as far as like if something is 5 yards away, that's short range. If it's 20 yards away, it's this range, and so on and so forth. You can use miniatures. You can put them on the board just to like kind of show where things are, but you aren't going to be using them as far as this is how far I can move. This is definitely, like I said, theater of the mind type of role playing, and which is something I enjoy. I actually like that a lot more than playing with a grid. I think when we added the grid with 3.0, the game became all about the minis, and that's what it was. It was just tactics moving around. In 4th edition, that was like where they went. But combat is a series of turns, and in combat you have what's called fast actions and slow actions, and that's it. Fast actions are exactly what you think. A fast action is just like, something that you can do quickly. Usually these are like an attack if you're right next to somebody. Slow actions are things that take longer, say moving up to somebody and attacking them. That would be a slow action. The way it works is, unless the party is surprised, unless like something happens and all the PCs like are sleeping and the dragon shows up or whatever, the party always goes first. It's just that no initiative, don't worry about it. Party always goes first. The party who has fast actions will take their fast actions, and then whatever they're fighting will take their fast actions, and then the party takes their slow actions, and then whatever they're fighting takes their slow actions. That's how that works. There's no unnecessary big giant initiatives to count. There's nothing like that. Okay, who goes on 22? Okay, now who goes on 17? You know, there's nothing like that. Which is also something I greatly enjoy. It just removes the initiative from it immediately. You know, and you can say, well, that's kind of silly. Why isn't there even a chance, you know, for you know the bad guys to go first? But like as I said, combat is fairly deadly, and I do like the fact that they just basically say, okay, fine, we're just going to give you this little bonus. We're going to give you that little Benny, and we're going to let you go first, so you can kind of avoid the combat, if you will. So that's, I mean, okay, that's the big thing, combat. And remember, anything else, any other action you do, there's certain things like if you're going to climb a wall, and you attempt to do it and you fail, you just can't do it. And it's just for whatever reason you can't try it again. You can't, you know, it's like you need some other mitigating factor to show up that's going to change. You know, you drink a potion of climbing or something, or somebody shows up with a rope, you know, to help you or something like that. You know, it's just like if you can't do it, you can't do it. Now, alternatively, like things like breaking down a door. Well, if time isn't a factor and you don't have to worry about, you know, some monster showing up and wondering why you're busting down the door, even if you roll your strength check and you fail, the GM can say, well, you know, in 10 minutes of smashing at the door, you're eventually just going to break it down into splinters and you're going to get through the door. I mean, that's one of those things where it's like you get the same thing with like picking locks. Like, eventually, you're going to pick the lock. If you have a half an hour to sit there, and you're eventually going to pick the lock, as long as because nobody's going to come in and bother you. You have that, and so it's a lot of times the DM or the referee or the GM or whatever is going to, you know, just kind of use their judgment in those situations and allow those things to happen. Advancement. You know, what happens is you start off, you have basically this 0 level creature. He's a dwarf, he's an elf, you know, whatever. Not an elf, a dwarf. He's a goblin. He's you know, a clockwork or whatever. The first adventure, if you've ever played Dungeon Crawl Classics, their idea in Dungeon Crawl Classics is that the first adventure is going to kill off most of the people. That's why each person has like 5 characters or whatever. This isn't that deadly, but this is in the premise that if you can get past the first adventure, which is a small introductory adventure, if you will. And they have, at the website for the game, they have several of those. The first adventure is just gets everybody to first level. And when they get to first level, then they can pick their first profession. And that's going to be like a warrior, or it's going to be a magician, or those things. And then what happens, what's really cool about this, there's no real experience points, but what happens is as you succeed in your adventures, the whole group raises their level. So like everybody goes from level 1 then goes to level 2. And then from level 2 to level 3. And when you get to level 3, what you get to do is you get to pick your expert profession. And so that's when like you're going to say, okay, well, I was a warrior, but now I'm a fighter. Or now I'm a paladin. Or maybe your warrior is going to become a cleric. You know, you're just, you know, and so now you're going to like, you know, get some spells and what have you. And I like that because it doesn't railroad you. It isn't just I'm a fighter and that's what I'm going to be. A lot of games try to have a situation where you are allowed to kind of create whatever you want, and a lot of them fail. But this one, it does it really, really well. It feels very fluid. It feels very natural, and you increase that as you go, and when you get to your master level things, then it's even more specialized. So like if you started off as a magician and you went to wizard and then you became a pyromancer or a chronomancer or something like that, you feel like you've had this progression. You feel like you've had a good story. Alternatively, if you had a situation where you were a warrior and then you became a spellbinder, which is like a magician or like a spellcaster that like uses spells to enhance their armor or enhance their weapons and things like that for combat. It feels like a fluid. It feels like a real thing, and so you know, it feels like you're actually creating your own class, you know, if you will. You're creating like skill trees and what have you. And I mean, it doesn't have like a skill tree, but I think you know what I mean as far as that is concerned. spells work like are really, really straightforward. You have a certain number of power points. Depending on like what different level, different professions you take, you'll get more power points. As you increase those power points, that tells you the different spells that how many of each level of spell you can use to cast. So like if you have like a 3 power, that will, I don't have a book in front of me right here, but like you'd have the ability to cast your 0 level spells. Each one of your 0 level spells, like I think it's 3 or 4 times, and then like your first level spells, you're able to cast those twice, and you're able to cast your second level spells, once, and depending on how many of those you have. And that isn't like you have to memorize them, you just get that ability. I mean, it's thank goodness. I mean, it's just like a lot of the bookkeeping, a lot of like the stuff is just not there in this. The 4th edition thing that I want to mention, that I feel like the spell system is kind of 4th edition-y, if you will. I think that exists, and also like certain classes also get abilities and things like that they're able to use, and so that feels really kind of 4th edition, but it isn't ridiculous like I found 4th edition to be. I don't know, maybe it's just the way it feels to me. Also, they have a situation where you are able to take a rest action, and when you use a rest action, then you get those things back, and you need to heal up your hit points and stuff like that. There's not really a lot of downtime with this. One of the big problems with a lot of RPGs, Pathfinder, D&D, things like that, is that you have this huge amount of downtime where like basically the cleric's there just to like heal everybody up. All right, we got to stop, we got to pray, we got to rest, and then we're gonna go again. We're gonna go get to our next 2 fights the next day, and we're gonna do the same thing over. You don't have that in this situation, if you will. Now, I could go on. I could talk and talk and talk and talk about like all the different like different classes and things like that, but I don't want this to last any longer than it already has. But these are my takeaways, from the game itself, and as far as like my enjoyment after running a couple of adventures with my buddies. I really enjoyed, like I said, the fast and loose nature of creating the characters. The creating the characters was a lot of fun for my players. They enjoyed having the cool backgrounds. You get quirks and things like that where you can use to kind of give yourself like these little like ticks and these little like things. You get like there's even a table where you get like one little weird strange item that you begin. Like one person got this little tiny like metal box that he couldn't open, but when you rattled it, you could hear something clunking on the inside. He had no idea what it was. It was just like, but there's like a little adventure hook. Like, what's in this? He can't smash it open. He can't do anything with it. Things like that. It was. There's things like that are built into the game that just make it fun. They make it interesting. They give the world like a breathing atmosphere, if you will. We enjoyed the kind of the grimness of the world, but also, like I said, it wasn't like grim and like dirty and like nothing crazy going on. I mean, this was like I said, a fantastic world, where people are there is high magic and to be had. I mean, I didn't really touch on the gods and the different religions, but I mean, there is a situation, obviously, like people are feeling the gods have forsaken them. I mean, like the demon lord is coming or whatever, and you can worship the demon lord, if you will, and things like that. So there's all those things that are kind of going on that kind of the background to the world is really well written, and there's a lot of information in it, and it's something that also adds a ton to it as well. Ultimately, I mean, the only thing I would say that I wish there was more, the bestiary is in this book. It has, like these, like cool monsters, like things that you'd expect to see, wraiths, orcs, different undead, slimes, things like that. But then they also have cool things like this guy, the Muttering Maw, if you will, which is like this giant thing that walks around with basically a big giant mouth. I guess it could technically be kind of like a Zorn, but it's more like this slimy thing that just moves around and eats people, so it's it's stuff like that. I mean, but I wish, and I mean, I'm guessing that in the near future they will release a larger bestiary or whatever for the system, if you will. So so there you go. I don't know if the RPG that I play most is our homegrown created Dungeons and Dragons system that we've cobbled together over 10-15 years of putting it, and putting through the test. We call it ED&D, and it's like a really it's very second edition D&D with a little bit of third edition thrown in. And it suits my gaming group very, very well. We've been playing D&D together for dang near 3 decades now. This was a very welcome respite and a very welcome change, and it was kind of a neat breath of fresh air. I see myself like being able to run a campaign of this at some point in my life. I'm going to do a campaign in this game system. I like the idea of doing it. I see a campaign in this being rather finite, though, like having a kind of an idea of 12 adventures, that are going to begin and will ultimately result in whether or not the players are able to save the world or not. And so being very finite. Whereas my ED&D campaign I have has been ongoing now for like 2 years, and it just keeps going. I mean, we've just kind of the characters have grown and kind of helped create the world that they're in, and so I see this also being a lot of fun being played at conventions. I could see myself taking this and maybe running a marathon set game of this at a convention, a gaming convention in the near future as well. So there you go. As far as I know, the only place you can pick this up is at the website for it. So if you just Google up, I think it's Schwalb Entertainment, I think, named after the creator. But if you just Google Shadow of the Demon Lord, you can go there. I do know that you can get the PDF through Drive-Thru RPG as well, if you want to go that route. I prefer having a book in my hand. That's why I have this. But yeah, so as far as this game, I am just absolutely loved reading this. If you are just looking for ideas for a campaign world or for your own campaign and ideas for something you could use, it's got tons of information here, tons of ideas, tons of cool stuff. I'd really strongly suggest you just heading over to the website itself and checking that out. So, yeah, I love reading RPG books. It's just one of those things where I really enjoy. I get lost in these worlds when I read them, and this one did not disappoint in the slightest. So there you go. If you are a big, avid, grim and perilous Warhammer RPG fan like I am, I would strongly suggest you go ahead and check this book out and pick it up, either through the hard copy or the PDF. I don't think you will be disappointed at all. So there you go. I appreciate you sitting through that long review of it. I tried to be as thorough as I possibly could to kind of give you a good idea of the game. If you have any questions about it, I'll be happy to answer those to the best of my ability. As I said, I really appreciate you sitting through this. And until next time, this was Undead Viking telling you to have yourself one heck of a nice day. All right, bye-bye.